In the previous videos, we talked a lot about justification. And when we talk about justification in epistemology, we are usually zooming in on specific individual beliefs. So we will say things like, this belief is justified, or this person is justified in having this belief. And so the thing that is justified is what we might call the smallest possible epistemic unit. The single propositional belief, the single thing that could be true or false, that could be believed or not believed. But I think it's useful to try to understand justification in a bigger framework, right? Because we are not beings who have these little individual beliefs, and we already saw that when we thought about justification, right? Justification has something to do with how beliefs are linked together. But we can go a little bit further and say that, as a believer, as somebody who has beliefs, as somebody who is an epistemic agent, I don't just have beliefs, I'm also trying to improve my beliefs and acquire new ones, right? I maybe want to get rid of the false ones, I want to acquire new true ones, and so I'm engaged in something that we might call inquiry. And if I'm doing it in anything like the right way, I'm going to be engaged in something that we would like to call rational inquiry. And so in this video, I want to ask a couple of questions about what rational inquiry is and how we should think about it. So, this is to some extent an investigation into the nature of rationality. Now, it is relatively common to make a distinction between two types of rationality. Maybe more, but at least two types that are very relevant for this video. And these two types of rationality would be, on the one hand, epistemic rationality, which is what we're interested in epistemology, or at least primarily interested in epistemology. And epistemic rationality has to do with getting true beliefs. And on the other hand, there would be practical rationality, right? And practical rationality has to do with how can I achieve my aims, right? And so, for instance, if I want to get to work on time, I set my alarm clock for the morning. Well, that is practical rationality in action, right? I'm doing something that will allow me to achieve my aim being to get to my lecture on time and not disappoint all those students. So, what we might think is that when we think about epistemic rationality, that's the only rationality that we need in epistemology, and we can set practical rationality, like how can I achieve my aims, aside. Maybe that's true and maybe it's not true. It's something we'll come back to later in this video. But for now, let's think about rational inquiry in terms of epistemic rationality. Like the search for what? Maybe it's just the search for truth. Right? And if it's just the search for truth, then maybe this is how we should think about epistemic rationality. Right? Somebody is epistemically rational when they attempt, in a good way, to get as many true beliefs as possible, right? And a good way would be a way that actually allows us to get as many true beliefs as possible. So let's try that out, right? To be epistemically rational is to act in such a way that you get as many true beliefs as possible. Well, that doesn't really seem to work. It doesn't really seem to work because here is a way of getting as many true beliefs as possible. It is just to indiscriminately believe anything that comes into your mind, right? You believe everything you hear, you believe even the things that you don't hear, you just sit there and make things up all day and you believe them. That's, like, in terms of quality, not a very good way to get true beliefs, maybe. I mean, you'll also get a lot of false beliefs if you just believe anything that comes into your mind. But if what we are interested in is getting as many true beliefs as possible, then quantity might be a lot more important than quality, right? Suppose that, if I'm not too unlucky, half of the things I'm going to believe are going to be true. So if I just believe enough things, and half of them are going to be true, I'm going to end up believing a lot of truths. Well, that can't be right. That can't be rational inquiry, right? And so, when we think about it in this way, we can see that clearly it was foolish to think that a rational inquirer is somebody who wants to believe as many true things as possible. Because a rational inquirer should also be somebody who doesn't want to believe false things. Right? So what about that? Right? Maybe we could imagine somebody whose overriding aim is to not have any false beliefs. Right? So it's all about quality. You never want to be wrong. Right? Would that be sort of epistemically rational, to strive for never being wrong? Well, again, it seems clear that the answer must be no, because here is a foolproof way to never be wrong. Never believe anything. Right? If you never believe anything, you can't be wrong. But that doesn't really look like rational inquiry either. I mean, that's just giving up. That's just, I don't know, epistemic despair or something like that. Or maybe skepticism, but it doesn't really look like rational inquiry. So it can't be the case that the aim that we have in rational inquiry is believing as many true things as possible. It also can't be the case that the aim we have in believing in rational inquiry is believing as few false things as possible. Rather, it must be the case that we are looking for some kind of balance. Right? I mean, we want to gain true beliefs, and we want them to be true, and we don't want them to be false. We don't want to gain any false beliefs. But we are willing to take a little bit of epistemic risk. Right? We're willing to believe certain things that might turn out to be false if it's, if we have enough evidence to believe that they are true. Right? So we are searching for a sort of balance between having lots of true beliefs and not having many false beliefs. And, well, what exactly the right balance is, that might be hard to say. And maybe it's not very useful to try to find some kind of number, right? I mean, well, the right balance is when you have 17 times more true beliefs than false beliefs or something like that. I don't think we need to think about it in that way. But I think it is helpful to think about rational inquiry as something where we know we have to take certain risks. I mean, the only really riskless thing is to believe nothing. So we have to take the risk of believing something false now and then. But of course, we want to minimize the risk while still being able to draw lots of conclusions and believe lots of things that are probably true. Okay. So that's a good first stab at trying to understand what rational inquiry is. But it generates a new set of questions, which is also very interesting. And again, we can sort of get insight into these questions by thinking about a strategy that fulfills the aim that I just told you about, like gaining true beliefs but not gaining false beliefs, having a sort of balance between those, while probably not striking us as very like rational or like a real kind of rational inquiry. So here's an example that I might be thinking of. Suppose that you get, they probably don't exist anymore in most parts of the world, but suppose that you get one of these old-fashioned like telephone books. Right? Nowadays, probably some kind of digital list. You get this digital list, name, address, telephone number, name, address, telephone number of everybody in New York City. I don't know. Okay, that's probably a fairly reliable record if it comes from the phone company. So here is one way to get a lot of true beliefs and probably get very few false beliefs. There are going to be some false beliefs. I mean, some people no longer live at that address and so on and so forth. But this is going to be mostly true. What I can do is I can learn by heart the telephone directory. Right? I can learn by heart the telephone directory. That will give me a lot of true beliefs. It will give me very few false beliefs. So if we meet somebody who says, well, I'm learning by heart the telephone directory because I'm a rational inquirer and I want to believe a lot of true things and not many false things, I don't think we'll be ready to applaud them and say, wow, you're doing really well. I think we want to be saying something like, well, that's completely pointless. I mean, why are you doing that? Right? That's not the kind of knowledge you should be trying to get. This is not rational inquiry. This is foolish. But why do we say that? Right? I mean, apparently, it's not the case that just the number of true beliefs or the number of falsehoods is relevant. It's also what the beliefs are about that plays a role. But what role? Well, I want to briefly look with you at 3 possible answers to that question. So here's one possible answer. One possible answer is to say that there is a sort of hierarchy of truths, in that some truths are just more important than others. And so maybe phone numbers are very unimportant, and maybe, let's say, a law of nature is more important, and maybe, let's say, insight into the nature of knowledge is even more important. I don't know. But we can imagine that there's a kind of hierarchy, right? Where there are very trivial facts that don't count for a lot when we're doing inquiry, and there are more interesting facts and even more interesting facts, and maybe there are these supremely important facts that are the most important ones to know. And so when we do rational inquiry, what we really should be doing is we should be trying to get higher and higher into this hierarchy. Right? Maybe we need to start at the bottom for one reason or another, but if it's at all possible, we should focus on the highest level of this hierarchy. That might be a familiar picture because it is the picture of Plato. Right? When Plato in the Symposion tells us how we get into insight into the good and the true, right? This sort of highest form where the real wisdom of the philosopher is gained. He really describes a sort of hierarchy, right? Which starts with like the direct knowledge of the senses, and then we get to sort of more abstract insights into nature. But then we rise even above nature, at least the material world around us, and we get insight into the necessary structure of things, and finally we get insight into the good. That is a hierarchy of truths, we could say, or of facts, and the higher ones are just more important than the lower ones. And on this conception, what it is to be a rational inquirer is not just to get a lot of truths, it is to get the best truths. Right? To try in a way that we have reason to believe to be successful, try to get at the best truths that there are. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about it, right? One way of differentiating between different kinds of truth. Here's a second way, and now practical rationality comes back in. Because somebody could also say, look, some truths are just more important than others because they are useful, right? For our practical purposes. And so learning by heart all the telephone numbers in New York City, that's not very useful because most of them you're never going to need to use. And even the ones that you do need to use, I mean, you can just look them up in this book or this digital list that you have, right? This doesn't make any sense. Right? What you should try to gain is knowledge that is actually useful to you, right? Where having this knowledge is going to allow you to make successful plans and execute these plans for getting to the purposes that you have. Right? And that is also a way to think about rational inquiry, of course. And then rational inquiry really becomes a part of practical rationality. Right? The epistemic becomes part and parcel of the practical. Because now to be epistemically rational is to, try to find out things that you need to know for what you want to achieve. And we even have a new way of thinking about risk, probably. Right? Something is like an acceptable risk if it's acceptable from this practical point of view. Right? If I have a little time to make a decision, okay, I mean, I should believe something even if my evidence isn't that great because I need to make a decision. Whereas if I have a lot of time to make a decision, I should probably be more careful, right? And amass more evidence and slowly and deliberately make come to a belief and make a decision based on that. And that's a pretty good story too, right? I think there's something about the Platonic story where we think, how many blades of grass there are like in the park over there, that's just not a very important fact. There's something in this Platonic hierarchy, but there's also definitely something in this practical view, right? Where you say, well, what do you want to achieve? I mean, surely that plays a role in how you should inquire about the world. Okay, here's the third option, the third way of making a distinction between different beliefs. It's to again make a distinction between beliefs or truths of different quality, but make it based on reasons that are internal to the project of rational inquiry itself. What I mean by that is this. right? Certain beliefs might be fruitful, right? They might help me either understand the world more, or do new research and new inquiry in better ways, or they might just allow me to derive a lot of other truths, and so on, right? Certain beliefs are going to be more fruitful to have in the project of rational inquiry itself. And so, if I learn a list of phone numbers by heart, well, that's not going to teach me anything, right? There's not going to be any interesting connections between them. I can't really connect it to any other parts of my knowledge to gain new insight into the world. These are just loose facts. Very uninteresting. Normally, when I do sort of a scientific inquiry, I might also be getting what at first sight seem loose facts, right? When I press the button, the meter reads 17.3. And when I press the button again, the meter read 17.2. And when I press the button again, the meter read 17.4. That might seem just as uninteresting as a list of phone numbers. But if it's a good experiment, then actually these individual readings can be brought together into some more general conclusion, right? Maybe at the end I'll say, aha, so now I know, or I have good reasons to believe, that the mass of an electron is this and that, right? Maybe that's what I was trying to measure, the mass of an electron. And that's going to be an interesting fact because it's going to allow me to do all kinds of theoretical calculations, to perform all kinds of other new experiments, and so on. I mean, this is going to be a very fruitful piece of knowledge. And so the individual sort of measurements are going to be useful because they are fruitful in getting this new piece of knowledge, which is itself fruitful, and is probably going to generate new pieces of knowledge, which are again fruitful, and so on, right? And so there is a way, like, even without bringing in like real practical rationality, where we wonder about my non-epistemic aims, to even within the epistemic, see certain beliefs, certain truths as more important because they are more fruitful to the project of inquiry itself. And so maybe rational inquiry is structured by that, right? It's structured by, okay, what should I do in my inquiry to have that inquiry itself be more successful and more fruitful? Now, here's the nice thing, which doesn't always happen in philosophy, which in fact doesn't very often happen in philosophy, but it happens now. These 3 points of view do not seem to be mutually exclusive, right? We can believe that all of them play a role in rational inquiry. So it might be the case that certain things are just better to know. And it might be the case that we should be keeping an eye out on our practical projects. And it might be the case that we should be keeping an eye out on the internal structure of inquiry itself and search for fruitful moves in inquiry. This can all be brought together in one overarching picture of what we are as rational beings, as believers, as inquirers. Painting that picture is one of the things that epistemology can try to do. And so maybe we're doing a little bit of that in these videos, and maybe we're gaining a little bit of self-knowledge in doing that.